Vicky and I settled into our bed and drifted off to sleep. However, judging by the amount of tossing and turning, neither of us fell asleep very quickly. The next week was very difficult for me. I called investigators twice to see if they had found anything, but all they told me was, "Our detectives are keeping an eye on them both, and we'll have a report for you next Monday." Monday finally arrived, and Jasmine and I met in the investigator's office. When we sat down, we almost felt like he had bad news. The investigator leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, when you wanted us to follow your spouses last week, I almost told you it would be a waste of money." This was one of the most difficult cheating spouse cases we have ever encountered. You were right, though. Steve and Vicky are having an affair. We have photographs and taped conversations to prove it. I must say I'm very surprised. If only we had stopped after following them here to St. Louis. We would never have found this in the Louis area. From the conversations we recorded, they only get together 3 or 4 times a year in cities far away from here. Even there, they pretend that they met by chance if they happen to be in town, and try very hard to maintain the appearance that they are just old acquaintances. However, what we found was a pair of very smart traitors. They went to 2 different cities and stayed in 2 different hotels. However, they met at the 3rd hotel, and even then they did not stay in the same room. They rented separate rooms at different times, but the rooms had an adjoining door. Steve paid for his room in cash, so there was no paper trail. Vicky registered as Angela Foster and used a credit card in that name with an address in Washington, Missouri. She had a government ID in the name of Angela Foster. Steve checked in as Stephen Allen, again using his government ID card for identification. Also, they only rented these rooms from Tuesday to Thursday. They did not stay long and only saw each other on those 2 days. I sat back in my chair and thought. I said, "Foster, Vicky's maiden name is Victoria Angela Foster. Jasmine just said, Allen is Steve's middle name." "Well," I said, "I think it's all over, except for the tears. I will speak with a divorce lawyer as soon as I can make an appointment." Jasmine started to say something when the investigator intervened. He said, "Wait, that's not all. Usually I don't even mention it, but in this case, I just can't convince myself that this is what it looks like. I know they had sex, but damn, it doesn't feel like a fling. It's more like they were playing some kind of game. We have hours of taped conversations, and most of them are very harmless. There were only 2 sexual intercourses the whole week, and the conversation in bed was so strange. Here, let me put in a tape and show you what I mean." When the investigator played the tape to the point he wanted us to hear, we heard Vicky speak. She said, "You know, Steve, I'm starting to think we need to end this. We've been doing this for 6 years now and we've had fun. We have proven that we are the exception to the rule and smart traitors. I think even you will agree that sex with each other is not nearly as good as with our spouses. Also, something Don said on Friday night bothers me. We talked in bed and he reminded me of what we learned at his parents' restaurant. He reminded me that all traitors are caught sooner or later. No one ever considers all possible options. Eventually, all cheaters either become overconfident or make one small mistake that gets them caught. I'm still worried about Denver. It was the first time we went to the same city and I still think it was a mistake. We shouldn't have changed the plan. We should only get together when we could go to different cities close enough to each other that we could meet in the middle, like we do here now. I know it's a hassle to rent 2 rooms and pay for a room we don't use, but still, I think we've proven what we set out to prove. We are smart cheaters, and if you play the game smart, you can cheat and win. I really don't want to do anything that could cause me to lose Don. I love him to death. He is the best man I have ever met in my life. Hell, after we got together the first time or 2, the only real charge I got out of this whole mess was planning and scheming. I can spend hours planning and thinking about deception. Getting documents, booking a room, and organizing a trip is better than solving a crossword puzzle or Sudoku. Damn sex only dulls my horns. Now don't pretend to be a man. I know for sure that you feel the same. You told me in Denver that you always return to your hotel unsatisfied. The investigator stopped the recorder and spoke again. He said, "That's not all, but this was the most mysterious part of the conversations. I just can't for the life of me understand why." The investigator stopped and stared at me as I started laughing. Finally, I pulled myself together and said, "I'm sorry. I really don't think it's funny and I'm mad as hell, but, well, there's something in this conversation that I think I need to enlighten you about. You see, a few years ago, a couple that Vicky and I were friends with got divorced. His wife cheated on him and she got caught. It turned out that she had been cuckolding her husband for almost 4 years before she was caught, and that it was just a simple little mistake that she made. The night we found out about the affair and divorce, we were hanging out with other friends. We entered into a discussion about deception and stupid things that traitors do. We remembered once again what my father said when we worked in the restaurant and what we saw while working there. Vicky continued to say that she was convinced that any person who wanted to cheat could do it if they just kept it under control and were smart. I was on the other side of the argument and told her that there was no way this could happen, that at some point the traitor would be caught. It may take years, but it will happen. I told her that the deception might even come up in some harmless way, but it would come up. In the end, we stuck to our guns. But for a few weeks, Vicky had mentioned something about smart cheaters winning. As far as I remember, her affair with Steve began around the time we argued. Vicky has always prided herself on her intelligence, and now I think I pressed the wrong button when we talked about this novel. I think she was trying to prove that she could do it and get away with it. I think she could have done it if she had stopped earlier. Now, no, she won't get away with it. Me and Jasmine were back together. This time we were waiting to meet with a divorce lawyer. Since sharing the costs of the investigator went so well, we decided to also hire a divorce attorney. When I was called into the office, the lawyer looked surprised. He said, "Mr. Patterson," and this, Mrs. Patterson. I grinned and said, "No, sir. I'm afraid not. I'm Don Patterson and this is Jasmine Sloan. We discovered that her husband and my wife were cheating on us and split the investigator's bill to get dirt on them. Now we thought we might as well split your fee." Lawyer George Spaulding smiled and gestured toward the chairs, saying, "Oh, of course. Maybe we can work something out. Could you please sit down while we discuss this?" I sat down and handed the lawyer a copy of the investigator's report and photographs. Before the lawyer could look at them, I said, "I don't think my case will be too difficult. I also brought a list of everything Vicky and I own and when and how we acquired those items. I also have a copy of our prenuptial agreement, which states not only how we will divide property, but also who has custody of the children. All I want is a divorce due to adultery and a settlement according to the prenuptial agreement. I'm afraid Jasmine's case will be a little more complicated." I handed my lawyer the documents I had brought to confirm my divorce. I sat back in my chair and waited for him to look through the forms. After the lawyer completed the paperwork for me, Jasmine gave him almost the same thing for herself. The only difference was that she didn't have a prenuptial agreement. The lawyer explained to us the essence of the divorce process, the time frame, and the schedule of his fees. He then discussed what Jasmine would want from her divorce if she could get one. Finally, he said, "I think I've had enough for now. I need to review all the documentation and the investigator's report. If I have any questions, I will of course call. Otherwise, I will prepare the documents and move on. Do you want me to just hand out the papers or call you first?" Jasmine and I wanted a call when the documents were ready to be served. We left the office and returned to our business, agreeing to keep in touch. 2 days later, George Spaulding called me. After the pleasantries were over, George said, "Don, I looked at everything you gave me, and I have to say that this is the strangest case I have ever seen. I even asked 2 of my partners to review it, and they agreed. Sure, there was cheating, but damn, man. I think it's pretty obvious that the woman loves you and, well, damn, it doesn't even look like an affair. It's almost as if it was a game and they had to have sex to play. Don, are you sure you want to continue with this scam? I mean, damn, from everything you said, you had an almost perfect marriage. You didn't fight, Your sex life was above par. You seemed to love and respect each other. Don, if you don't mind me saying so, it's almost as if you were playing the game too. Now it's your turn, and the only choice you have is divorce. Can't you talk to Vicky and forget about it? I know you listened to the tapes, and she told Steve that they needed to break up, and that it was basically just a game for her. I sat down and thought again. Finally, I said to George, "No, George." I asked myself the same question, and one day I thought I could do just that. I think if it was just a game and they weren't having sex, if they were only together in an emotional or, better yet, pretend romance, I might be able to ignore it. I think at first maybe Vicky was just upset that I made fun of her belief that she could be a smart cheater. She simply could not accept my statement that there were no smart traitors and that it was a foregone conclusion that traitors would eventually be caught. If she hadn't taken the final step and let Steve make love to her, I might have forgotten about her cheating. It just went on for too long. I mean, fucking 6 years. Even if the sex was lousy and they didn't get as much pleasure from each other as they did from Jasmine and me, it was still adultery, and she had to pay the price for it. George sighed and said, "Well, it's your life. I just hate doing this to you. I have documents ready to submit. When do you want her to be notified?" I smiled and said, "Well, George, he and Steve are on the East Coast this week. She should be back late Friday afternoon. Can we notify her on Friday at work? I'm guessing her plane lands at noon, so she should be in her office at, say, 3:30 or 4. I'd like her to be notified and given the tape I have for her." This is a fragment of her conversation in which she and Steve talk about the breakup. You can listen to it, of course. But at the end, I say, they lost. Like I said, cheaters will always screw up and get caught. On Friday morning, I gathered all my crew in my office before they headed to their work sites. I explained that Vicky and I were getting a divorce and why. I told them that they should not take orders from her and not tell her anything more about the business or my personal life. When they left, Laura, my secretary, said, "Oh, Don, I'm so sorry. I just can't believe Vicky would do something like that. I still remember how she hates traitors." Laura laughed and continued, "I mean, some of the comments she used to make when we saw someone we knew doing something like that." At 4:10 the same day, my lawyer called me and said that the documents had been served. Around 4:30 that same day, I received the phone call I had been dreading. Using the caller ID, I realized it was Vicky. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello, Vicky." I heard sobs, then a quiet, weakly trembling voice said, "Don, please, can't we end this? You know that I love you with all my heart. I know I was so stupid now, but you pissed me off the hell that night when you lectured me in your arrogant way for saying something a smart cheater could get away with. Don, for the first year, all we did was plan and meet just to show that we could do it. I know you heard me when I told Steve I didn't love him, and the sex wasn't even that good. You know we were going to stop. Please don't do this to me. I still can't believe you actually found out about this after all these years. I'd like to know how the hell you did it. Vicky, I didn't do this to us. You did. Now I have to end this. I thought we were completely on the same page about cheating and affairs. I thought, damn it, I knew none of us would approve of cheating. We agreed that in the end, traitors get what they deserve. No, I'm just wondering how you could even do something like that. How could you even justify this feeling that we both experience? I decided to take pity on Vicky in a sense. I decided to tell her how I found out about this affair. Vicky, I never intended to tell you how I caught you, but now I think I will. You were partly right when you said you shouldn't have gone to Denver together. That Thursday, before you came home, I was in the office and Jasmine Sloan walked in. She wanted us to then build a deck and landscape her backyard. She let me use Steve's office, and I saw a picture of you with him and the trophy his car won at the State Classic Chevrolet. She told me that you were one of his old girlfriends. I almost bought it until I realized that in the photo, you look old enough that it happened recently. In addition, you were wearing jewelry and clothes that I knew were only about 2 years old. I was almost ready to put aside my fears and assume that you were dating before we became a couple and just somehow ran into him at the car show. I changed my mind when Jasmine and I talked a little more, and I learned that you were both in Denver that week. We have decided to hire an investigator and follow you. We kept tabs on you both for the next month, and with the exception of one dance at your friend's party, you two had no contact. We were going to stop investigating and write it off as a coincidence that you just happened to see Steve and posed for a photo with him. By that time, Jasmine and I were exchanging all kinds of information about you two, and I remembered that she told me that Steve was going to be in San Antonio, and you told me that you were going to be in Austin. We decided to follow you during this week. If we didn't find anything, we were going to throw it away. But we found something, didn't we? I heard sniffling in the background. Then Vicky said, Dawn, I love you very much. I do not want to lose you. Can't you just please forgive me? Just this once? I sighed and answered, No, honey, I just can't. At least I can't right now. I think I could if you hadn't cheated on me, but I just can't get over the fact that you had sex with him and how long you had an affair. But honey, don't you see? It wasn't really a novel. It was more like a game. I just had to prove that it was possible. Sex was because we were away from home and we were horny as hell. You know, it was almost as if we were using each other to masturbate. We didn't make love, and as far as I remember, we never told each other that we loved each other. It was always about playing the game and then for the last 4 years just getting some sexual relief. Vicky, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that you did it. You planned to make me a cuckold, and you succeeded. You were supposed to meet Steve somewhere and planned to meet him. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if this happened at one of your friend's parties. Isn't it? Vicky sighed and said, Yes, Dawn. That's how it was. At that time, we were just talking. He came up to the table and invited me to dance. The girls and I were talking about a couple we saw at the bar and worked with. They attacked each other, and I made the remark we always made about smart traitors and how there are no such things. As we danced, I told Steve about our conversation and what we believed in. Before leading me back to the table, he said, You know, I bet we could beat that pattern. I travel a lot, and if I could find someone who did the same, I bet we could meet in another city far from home and could cheat without anyone ever catching us. We danced a few more times that evening and decided to try it. I learned that he was traveling as a manufacturer's representative, and he learned that I was conducting a compliance review. We compared notes and found out that in about 3 weeks we would be in the same area, so we agreed to meet. At that meeting, we began to plan our, at that time, ideal, non-sexual romance. We agreed never to call each other either at home or on our mobile phones. We mostly used burner cell phones and called from work or during lunch, but only to arrange our next meetings. We received fake IDs. I got a new credit card and sent the bill to the mailbox near my parents' house. You know how often I go to them to check the flag regularly. We've covered everything except the photography. I just had no idea that he still had it. Vicky smiled sadly and continued, I think, as we always said, just one little mistake and the traitor will be caught. I'm so sorry, honey. I guess I was just so carried away by the intrigue. I love you. I heard a click when Vicky hung up. I was surprised to feel tears running down my cheeks. I sat back in my chair and thought, I never knew when Laura said goodnight to me. My next memory was how I shuddered because it was dark outside. Before the final decision on divorce and at different times, both sets of parents tried to dissuade me from divorcing Vicky. Perhaps the most sincere request came from her parents. One Saturday, they called me and asked if they could come to my house and visit the children. Naturally, I agreed. After they had some time with the kids, all 3 of us adults sat in the lounge chairs by the pool in the shade, watching the kids in the pool. Vicky's mother turned to me and said, Dawn, we all know that my daughter has made a complete ass of herself. When she came to our house that first night, she was devastated. We had a hard time getting out of her what was wrong. She was hysterical and said she had ruined everything. We finally calmed her down enough to get the whole story out of her. She showed us all the evidence you had on her. Dawn, I have to say that if I had caught her father doing what she did, I would have left him too. But can't you do what I say instead of what I would do? I know she loves you very much. I see it every time she looks at you, every time she talks about you, every time she sees your photo. Her problem is her damn intellectual superiority. She was so used to being the smartest woman around that she had to prove that she could handle something like this. Don, did you ever think that maybe you kind of pushed her into this? She told me about your argument over friends just before she decided to prove that she could have an affair without getting caught. I looked at my mother-in-law and said, "Yes, Mona, I thought I might have contributed to her affair. I think because I said that if she had just met him and they didn't have sex, I could have gotten over it, but she didn't. You know how we both said we were cheaters before we got married. You know how adamant she was about the additions to the prenuptial agreement that dealt with infidelity. Then she did something like this. No, I just can't leave it like this. I'm breaking my heart over this, but I just can't." The divorce was final, and for once I was glad we had a prenuptial agreement. We had some investments that we had to share. Besides, we owned this house together. Since my business was registered in the family's name, and the only shares I had were considered gifts to me, Vicky did not receive any share in it. I allowed Vicky to withdraw the value of her share of the house from the investment account, so I owned it outright. I was always nice to Vicky when I saw her and never gave her any trouble about visiting the children. I still wanted to hug her when I saw her, but I knew I could never trust her again. One day I was taking the kids out to dinner when Jasmine walked into the building. She stopped at the door and looked around. She seemed unsure of herself. The hostess approached her and asked about the number of guests. Jasmine raised one finger. I saw this and jumped out of my chair. I intercepted the hostess and Jasmine before they reached her table. "Jasmine, good to see you," I said. "I saw you tell Patty that you were alone. If you want, just my children are with me. We could sit at the same table?" Jasmine looked at me for a moment, then smiled. I felt my heart lighten, and the whole room seemed brighter. She stepped towards me, quickly hugged me and kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you," she said. "I think I would like it. I've been so lonely since..." After Jasmine was seated, I introduced her to my children. Even before she opened the menu, my father was next to the table and said, "Don, are you hiding something from me? Who is this beautiful lady?" I laughed and Jasmine smiled. I turned to my father and said, "Dad, this is Jasmine Sloan. It was her husband. Her mother was Donita Horton. They came here often when I was a child." Mr. Patterson smiled and said, "Oh yes, now I remember you. You look so much like your mother that I can't believe I didn't recognize you. How are your parents? I haven't seen them for many years." Jasmine looked at Mr. Patterson and said, "I guess they're both okay." Sometimes I talk to my dad on the phone. After the divorce, he moved and is now in Kansas City. I see my mother a couple of times a month. She lives north of the city. Well, I hope you have a good time tonight. I hope that now that you remember where we are, you will come back here more often. After Jasmine placed her order, I asked, "How are you doing?" I wish I had called more, but summer is my busiest time of the year. Although I probably use that as an excuse, I could find the time. I'm really sorry. "Oh, don't be stupid," Jasmine said. "I know that you are busy and I didn't call you either. In fact, I'm here tonight to celebrate. Steve finally gave in, and today my divorce was final. We had to sell the house and we split everything 50-50. Because of this, he fought child support and got a divorce. But since he was the one who didn't want me to work, I eventually won. I had to rent a small, crummy apartment, but as soon as I find a job, I'll find a better place." After eating, the children became more and more restless. Jasmine and I talked and even ordered a second bottle of wine. Finally, I said to Jasmine, "I think I need to go before these two bullies ban me from this place. It was really great talking to you again. Maybe we can do something similar again?" Jasmine smiled and nodded her head. She said, "I would like that. I can afford it." She called the waitress and asked for the bill. The waitress smiled and said that both bills were paid. I laughed and said, "That old bastard. I usually cry and he knows it. I think he's trying to set us up." I reached into my wallet and put the appropriate tip for the waitress on the table, then stood up. "Come on, children, go say goodnight to your grandparents and let's go home." I helped Jasmine up from her chair and offered her my hand. "May I escort you to your chariot, my lady?" I asked. Jasmine smiled, took my hand and said, "You can, good sir." As we waited for the kids to return, I turned to Jasmine and said, "You know, I really don't want this night to end. Before you came, I was hoping that I could get home in time to just sit by the pool and relax. All I was looking forward to was spending the night alone with the kids." Jasmine looked at me and said, "Me too. Except that we don't have a pool in our apartment and I don't have kids." "Jasmine, it's still early. Would you like to come visit me again after I put these two to bed?" Jasmine smiled and nodded her head affirmatively. She whispered, "Yes, I would really like that." After the kids went to bed, I stocked the refrigerator with wine, beer, soft drinks, and ice. I placed it between the sun loungers by the pool and told Jasmine to choose for herself. I reached for the Pepsi and leaned back in my chair. Jasmine also took a Pepsi. I looked at the pool, glistening in the dim light, sighed, and turned to Jasmine. I said, "You know, I think your mother is partly responsible for my divorce. Oh, damn. I'm sorry, Jasmine. I shouldn't have said that. I was just wondering." "Well, I mean," Jasmine sat and looked at me in horror. I thought I saw a small tear in her eye. I rose from my chair with difficulty and sat down on the edge of Jasmine's chair. I wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and said, "Let me now explain that I made a complete ass of myself. When I was 16, I had only been working at the restaurant for about 3 weeks when your mother walked in with a strange man. They had dinner and then went to a bar to drink and dance. I always thought your mother was the most beautiful woman in the world until I met you. Anyway, I couldn't take my eyes off her, and my father not only saw me looking at her, but also heard me say that I should tell my friends about what I saw when we got there. To school next Monday." Phew, I still remember the reprimand and lecture that I listened to that evening in his office. I think that evening, however, influenced my thoughts and beliefs about marital fidelity to this day. You know that later Vicky came to work with us and was given the same lecture. We used to talk so much about our experiences and what we saw in the restaurant. I thought we agreed with my father's philosophy. Maybe, although I was too stubborn about fidelity for my own good. I just thought that my meeting with your mother that night set me on the tough path I've been on throughout this whole case. I'm sorry, and before you ask, no. None of my family or our employees ratted out your mother. I don't know who did it, but it was almost a year after that incident before your parents got divorced. And as far as I know, that was the only time she and her male friend were in a restaurant." Jasmine looked at me and said, "Well, maybe something good came out of this mess then, or maybe not, depending on how you look at it. You know, she married this man and they lived together until he died in a car accident a few years ago. I'm not sure, but I think she cheated on him too. I have always heard that once a cheater remains a cheater." After I was sure Jasmine had stopped crying, I returned to my chair and we started talking about more interesting things. I learned that she had a degree in accounting and had worked in accounting for some time. I smiled to myself because I remembered my mother complaining about how she wanted to get more rest but couldn't since she did the books for the bar and restaurant and also helped supervise the wait staff. I also thought that I should hire some kind of nanny for Laura. Maybe. The following Wednesday, I hadn't been home from work long enough to do anything other than drink a glass of water when I heard a knock on the front door. I opened it and was hit in the chest with something soft but heavy. I focused my gaze and saw Jasmine crying, hanging on my neck and trying to kiss me. She said through tears, "Thank you." "Oh, thank you. Your parents called me and offered me a job. I went for an interview and test and they hired me. I start tomorrow. They pay me too much and..." She started crying again, and I just hugged her to my chest and stroked her hair. Over the next few months, Jasmine and I grew closer and closer. I started taking the kids out to dinner 4 or 5 times a week and seemed to space out the visits so that the accountant was free to dine with them. Christmas came and Jasmine was invited to dinner at the Pattersons. Me and Jasmine both helped prepare the New Year's party at the bar. My father and brothers and sisters constantly complained that we were of little use. Every time they looked for us, they found us hugging and kissing. However, all this was said in jest. By this time, we were already an established couple. Every invitation one of us received automatically included the other. Valentine's Day has arrived. It was another big day for the restaurant and bar, so Jasmine and I had to work again. After most of the customers had left the restaurant, I walked into the restaurant part of the building and said, "Jasmine, could you come to the bar for a minute, please? The band is on break and I need you to help me get on stage for a moment." Jasmine smiled and said, "Of course. I needed a break from this place anyway." When we got on stage, I asked Jasmine to hold the microphone stand while I knelt down. I pulled on its base and then raised my voice. I said, "Hey, I need some light. Can you get it for me?" Jasmine was looking around for a light source when one of the spots illuminated both of us. I said, "Jasmine." The microphone picked up my voice and transmitted it throughout the hall. When Jasmine looked down at me, she saw me holding something out for her to take. It was a black square and she thought it might be part of a black microphone stand. The light was quite bright and she couldn't see very well. As she reached for the object I was holding out to her, I spoke again. I said, "Jasmine, I'm down here, groveling at your feet. I beg you, will you marry me? You brought sunshine back into my life, and now I'm only happy when I'm with you." As soon as Jasmine's fingers touched the box, her mind deciphered what I was saying. She closed the box with her hands and said, "What? You said—" Jasmine opened the small box and saw a beautiful ring inside. Her jaw dropped. She gasped and brought her empty hand to her mouth. She then slowly took the ring out of the case. In slow motion, she looked at me, then began to put it on the ring finger of her left hand. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She knelt down and gave me a deep, long, sensual kiss. "Yes," she moaned. "Oh yeah, I love you with all my heart, and I've been dreaming for months that you would love me too." The hall resounded with whistling and hooting. When Jasmine came out to take a breath, she saw my whole family gathered around. My brother lifted her to her feet and hugged her. Then she was passed from person to person as they hugged and congratulated our lucky stars. Jasmine has scheduled her wedding for June. Over the past months, she has slowly moved her belongings from her small apartment to my house. At the post-wedding reception, Jasmine and I opened gifts. At the very bottom of the pile lay a single yellowed envelope. Inside was a heart-shaped valentine that seemed as old as the envelope. The original signature has been erased. Looks like it could be me. On the valentine were written the words, "I received this valentine from the only man I have ever loved on our first Valentine's Day. Since then, I have carefully kept it. Somehow it seems fitting that I pass this on to you now. Perhaps this is a symbolic transfer of his heart from me to you. May the rest of your lives be filled with love and attention for each other. May you never break another's heart or allow foolish pride to tear you apart. Congratulations. I wish you both a life full of love and happiness. With all my love, Victoria." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.